divided into 4 separate samples. One piece of the shroud was sent to Oxford University, another to the Swiss Institute of Technology in Zurich, and 2 smaller pieces were sent to the University of Arizona, where Dr. Tim Gill was a member of the original carbon dating team.
Everybody and all the plants and all the animals on the surface of this planet have approximately the same amount of carbon-14 in them as long as they're alive. When we die, the C14 in our bodies decays with a known decay rate. If we measure the carbon-14 in the sample and compare it to a standard, we can calculate the age from the ratio of the sample to the standard.
First, the shroud sample was cleaned of any impurities. Then, it was literally burned up.
We start off with a piece of linen, and we combust it at this end, turning the carbon of that sample into a gaseous state.
The CO2 gas is then solidified and turned into graphite, or pure carbon. Each graphite sample is shot through an accelerating mass spectrometer, which can then count each individual carbon-14 atom.
This particle detector can count 1 atom at a time. For a modern sample, we count upwards of 100 atoms per second. For an old sample, one that's close to 50,000 years, we may count 5 or 10 atoms in 2 minutes.
From the number that passed through, scientists are able to accurately find a date. For the Shroud of Turin test, each lab worked secretly and independently of the other, and yet each came up with the same range of dates.
We wanted to make sure we were right, so we measured it more times than we would regularly, and we knew that it wouldn't be 2,000 years old after 5 minutes. The Shroud of Turin turned out to be a medieval sample from the 14th century, and that's what the radiocarbon date shows.
The shroud was dated between 1260 and 1390. The carbon dating was a stunning revelation, making headlines around the globe. The scientific facts were in. The Shroud of Turin could not be the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. STIRP member Ray Rogers had always been open-minded about the authenticity of the shroud, but he was a man of science, and in his view, this was final, conclusive evidence that the shroud was a fake. Despite this evidence, many faithful continued to believe that the Shroud of Turin was real, but their beliefs were dismissed by the broader scientific community, especially by scientists like Ray Rogers.
I'd been reading these things by people from the lunatic fringe who were explaining why the date was wrong. I was irritated and just getting mad. I don't have any faith at all in somebody who says, I think I see flowers on the shroud, or I think I see little sailing ships sailing along. Well, I don't have much faith in that.
What Ray Rogers did believe in were conclusions based on hard scientific evidence. But the pragmatic man of science was about to get the shock of his professional life. The carbon dating of the Shroud of Turin in 1988 concluded that it was not the 2,000-year-old burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth, but a fake, dating only as far back as the 1300s. Ray Rogers and the STIRP team had ruled out the shroud was a painting or dyed relief, but it was still a mystery how the image had gotten there. And that sliver of doubt was enough for many to keep the faith.
There are people who are so emotionally involved in this that they're not going to accept any scientific result. Their faith is not going to be shaken by some pointy-headed scientist.
Sue Benford and her husband Joe Marino are among those who believe the shroud is real.
I had never heard of the shroud before 1997. I was flipping channels and saw the face on the TV, and there was something very knowing that I had that was really Jesus' face.
Benford says that this vision inspired them to find proof that the carbon dating results were wrong. Both acknowledge that they are not scientists and that they have no scientific background or accreditations. Sue runs a small not-for-profit that advocates for the humane use of animals in scientific research. Joe works in an Ohio State University library. And yet, they may have uncovered the clue that will finally solve this mystery.
Look here. Nowhere else is there this definitive, intentional dark green.
Working out of her home with photos taken by the 1978 Sturk team, Benford noticed something strange about the area where the carbon dating samples had been taken. The herringbone weave that is so consistent throughout the main body of the shroud seemed misaligned, off-axis.
Our theory is that there's a mixture of 16th century cloth and 1st century cloth, and the data that we're finding on the cloth matches that theory.
Benford and Marino argue that carbon dating is wrong because the section from where the samples were taken had been contaminated with fibers from a later date. According to this theory, cotton from the 16th century was invisibly woven into the linen fibers of the shroud. A fixer was applied to the patched area, and the repair was expertly dyed so that it would be invisible to the naked eye. It is a craft they contend was called French reweaving.
When you do this type of French reweaving, you're not just stitching two pieces of material together, and that would give you all of one and all of the other. It's more like this. The ends are unraveled in the main cloth, the ends are unraveled in the patch, they are spliced together, and the threads are connected and interwoven, so you see literally an interweaving such that you have old and new on both sides of the equation.
I'm skeptical when I'm listening to this, but they had taken photographs that were available of the samples taken for the carbon dating, and they had submitted these to several textile experts who didn't know they were looking at a photograph from the shroud, and each of these textile experts, independent of each other, said, you know, this looks rewoven. The samples taken for radiocarbon dating were cut from one corner of the shroud, adjacent to a seam. It was effectively an area that was damaged by someone cutting a piece out of it, possibly to sell as relic, so it needed to be repaired.
So when the C14 samples were taken, you're going to have a lot of end mixing on both sides. So unless you actually took one thread and did them individually, you wouldn't get a 1st century or a 16th century. You'd get, you know, guess what? Something around 12 to 1400.
Benford went looking for statistical anomalies in the carbon dating results that would confirm a mixture of old and new threads. What she discovered was an incredible pattern that could not be explained away as coincidence.
If you look at their unpublished data now, Arizona had some of the oldest dates at 1238 and the youngest at 1430. And you think, were they really 200 years off in their lab? Well, perhaps it's because of material they took from both of their different sides. Now, we don't know that for sure, and they haven't confirmed that. But that's interesting. Oxford is the next oldest, and they're the closest to this side with the most main 1st century material. Zurich is in the middle, and guess what? They have the middle amount, and they have the middle date.
In 2000, Benford and Marino presented a paper in Orvieto, Italy, detailing their theory that medieval cotton had been introduced into the damaged corner of the shroud. Not surprisingly, it was immediately dismissed by the scientific community. One scientist in particular was outraged.
One of the things Ray had a problem with was the fact that these weren't scientists, and he didn't take them very seriously.
I think he lumped us in with the lunatic fringe at that time, and probably for many times beyond that.
I had given up on the shroud, and this was about the same time that the lunatic fringe were coming up with an infinite number of ways the date could be wrong, and this was just the last straw.
I got a call from Ray, and he goes, what the hell is this? This is nonsense. I can prove these people wrong in 5 minutes. And I said, well, Ray, go for it.
But when Ray Rogers went into his lab, he was shocked by what he